After studying this module, you shall be able to know the term consumerism, learn the utility of consumerism, know the position of consumerism in India, and identify the regulatory framework for consumers' interests. Consumerism essentially means the growing wants and needs of an individual for goods and services. India is one of the largest and fastest growing economies in the world. The consumer's standard of life is going higher and hence his needs are escalating as well. Consumerism in India is in a new high and refuses to show signs of budging anymore. The Indian consumer, due to his exposure of the global market, strives to get the best of the goods in his homeland. Behavior of consumers is influenced by the stage of consumerism that they are passing through. Consumerism can be understood as organized efforts of the consumers seeking to redress or remedy for dissatisfaction in the acquisition of their standard of living. This brings our focus to the consumer movement in India, which has evolved over the years. The basic question is, why do consumers consume? The obvious answer is that consumers want to maximize the utility. For the purpose of this chapter, consumerism has to do with fight against exploitation by the consumers. It is the collective effort to protect the rights of consumers. This presses businesses to behave responsibly. The consumerism has to do a lot with the level of consumer movement that particular economy has reached. Let us now discuss the philosophy of consumerism. Consumer movement has been closely associated with the philosophies of consumerism, which fall broadly into the following four areas. Consumerism is closer to Western philosophy, where consumers, especially middle class, indulge in conspicuous consumption. It is a social and economic order that encourages the purchase of goods and services in ever greater amounts. The term is often associated with criticisms of consumption. Consumerism is used to describe the tendency of the people to identify strongly with products or services they consume, especially those with commercial brand names and perceived status symbolism appeal. For example, a luxury car, designer clothing, or expensive jewelry. Second, philosophy of consumerism refers to the era when consumers' political powers started showing its presence in a subtle form. The term consumerism goes back to at least 1915 in the sense of advocacy of rights and interests of consumers. That is in the Oxford English Dictionary. Consumerism here can be understood as the organized efforts of consumers seeking to redress or remedy for dissatisfaction in the acquisition of their standard of living. The organized movement has pressurized the government to enact laws in various parts of the world. This also pressurizes business to behave in socially responsible manner. The third philosophy of consumerism is about the consumer's right being addressed at corporate level. This means consumers don't have to go to the court. At corporate level, team of lawyers, customers and consultant deal with the problem and resolve it amicably. They test the quality of the products being launched in the market. The dynamics of business are changing to incorporate this kind of consumerism. In fact, consumerism today is an all-pervasive term meaning nothing more than people's search for getting better value for their money. Consumer behavior is strongly influenced by the evolutionary stage of consumer movement in the context of current business environment. Kotler in 1972 said, "Consumerism is a social movement seeking to augment the rights and powers of buyers in relation to sellers. It is manifested in new laws, regulations and marketing practices as well as in new public attitudes towards government and business." As marketing concept, consumerism is a social and economic order that is based on the systematic creation and fostering of a desire to purchase goods or services in ever greater amounts. In an abstract sense, it is the belief that the free choice of consumers should dictate the economic structure of a society. The movement seeks to protect and inform consumers by requiring such practices as honest packaging, advertising, product guarantees and improved safety standards. Consumerism is concerned with protecting consumers from all organizations with which there is exchange relationship. It encompasses the set of activities of government, business, independent organizations and concerned consumers that are designed to protect the rights of consumers. The Chambers Dictionary 1993 defines consumerism as the protection of the interests of the buyers of goods and services against defective or dangerous goods, etc. Consumerism is a movement or policies aimed at regulating the products or services, methods or standards of manufacturers, sellers and advertisers in the interest of the buyers. Such regulation may be institutional, statutory or embodied in a voluntary code occupied by a particular industry, or it may result more indirectly from the influence of consumer organizations. For emerging economies like India, this movement is still catching up momentum. Consumer awareness needs to be increased regarding misleading advertisements and protest the use of adulterated goods and incorrect weights and measurements. The very need for consumerism has grown because of the greed of business community. They want to make quick bucks at the cost of hapless consumers. Not only private business owners, public sector, especially utility service providers like electricity boards, railways, telephone departments cheat poor consumers. There needs to be proper consumer education to make them aware of their rights. The rights of traditional buyers are following. 1. The right not to buy a product that is offered for sale. 2. The right to expect that product will be safe. 3. The right to expect the product perform as claimed. Consumers' right not to buy a product is of no use unless they have information, education and protection to make wise decisions. Consumer advocates call for additional rights such as the right to be well informed about important aspects of product, the right to be protected against questionable products and marketing practices, the right to influence products and marketing practices in a way that will improve the quality of products, and the right to consume in a way that will preserve the world for future generation of consumers. A strong consumerism results into 1. Consumerism sends indication to sellers and producers about their real needs. This helps them to develop societal marketing. 2. When consumers are in a position to protect their rights, they are not taken for granted. Businesses are forced to resort to healthy practices. 3. The government is pressurized to act to protect the consumer's right by enacting the required laws and legislation as and when they are necessary. 4. Consumers to support the producers in minimizing the imperfections of distribution. The tendency to charge exorbitant rates is discouraged. 5. Consumerism has led to more specific proposals by activists. Right to information has resulted in right to know the rate of interest being charged on loan, labeling of ingredients, date of manufacturing on the products and so on. 6. Consumerism has led to pushing proposals relating to quality of life, which has the requirement of controlling the ingredients of certain products. Similarly, proposals relating to preserving earth for future generation require use of sustainable ingredients, recycling and reducing solid wastes and managing energy consumption. It's not only for the government to pursue sustainable marketing, consumers too have to play their role towards healthy practices. India is a developing economy where not all consumers are well educated. Consumers are often exploited, misled by deceptive advertisements and packaging, poor after-sale services, adulteration and price collusion and so on. Situational factors that aid exploitation by businessmen are 1. Vast population, 2. Imbalance in income distribution, 3. Backwardness, illiteracy and ignorance, 4. Indian consumers get carried away by clever advertising. Reasons for rise in consumerism in India are: 1. Imbalance in demand and supply of commodities leading to hoarding, black marketing and profiteering. 2. Low literacy level and lack of awareness of rights encourages businessmen to be indifferent to consumers. 3. Lack of effective competition. 4. Consumerism is still in its infancy. 5. Legal framework is time consuming and tiresome. And lastly, lamentable state of public sector monopoly. Remedies to these problems: active participation from business, government and consumers. Business must ensure efficiency in production and quality of output and must refrain from unfair trade practices. Government through legislations and statutory bodies prevent exploitation of consumers. Consumers should assert their rights and protect themselves from business malpractices. Marketing concept has to be broadened to include societal marketing concept. Unilever Lifebuoy's Swasthya Chetna and Tata Tea's Jagore campaigns are example of the case. India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The consumer's standard of living is going higher by every passing day. The retail sector, both organized and unorganized, strive hard to cater to the vast range of Indian consumers. This sector is expected to grow at a rate of 25% to 30% annually. India being the fifth largest retail industry in the world, the trend is quite remarkable. The consumers can be divided into three groups. 1. The first group comprises of consumers who are extremely brand conscious. 2. The second group satisfies their needs from outlets that do not hold popular brands. The third group follows the middle path, sometimes from high-end retail outlets and sometimes cheaper outlets as and when necessary. They can be further classified into 1. Upper middle class consumers, 2. Middle class aspirants and consumers, 3. Destitute who have very little purchasing power and live hand to mouth. The upper and middle class need a feel-good experience today and are gravitating towards luxury, experimenting with fashion and technology, and are spoiled for choice. India's IT boom has gained momentum because of cheap operating costs of software development firms which provide solutions for all intents and purposes under one roof. This IT boom has provided easy employment for a tech-savvy Indian, which has created a new generation of young urban professionals with increased purchasing power. This, accompanied by lower interest rates on easily attainable loans, stimulates consumer spending. About 3/4 of the Indian population is rural, so there seems to be tremendous potential for rural retail which affects consumption patterns in India. In good olden days, the principle of caveat emptor, which meant buyer beware, governed the relationship between seller and the buyer. But with the growth of trade and globalization, this rule no more holds true. On account of complex structure of the modern goods, it is the producer or seller who can assure the quality of goods. With manufacturing activity becoming more organized, whereas the buyers are still weak and unorganized. In this age of e-commerce related innovations, the buyer is more likely to be misled, duped and deceived day in and day out. In spite of all the various legislations in place, consumer apathy and lack of education among the masses have kept the consumerism in India quite weak. In the present situation, consumer protection, which is as old as consumer exploitation, has assumed greater importance. Consumerism is concerned with protecting consumers from all organizations with which they have a relationship. It encompasses the set of activities of government, business, independent organizations and concerned consumers that are designed to protect the rights of consumers. In fact, consumerism today is all pervasive term meaning nothing more than people's search for getting better value of money. Regulation of business through legislation is one of the important means of protecting the consumers. Consumerism has over the time developed into a sound force designed to aid and protect the consumer by exerting legal, moral and economic pressure on producers and providers in some of the developed countries. Let us move on to discuss the regulatory framework for consumerism in India. There are certain legislations to protect the interest of consumers so that the undesirable and unfair trade practices could be curtailed. The government has enacted nearly 50 laws which can be interpreted in favor of consumer. Government of India has armed itself with a number of statutory weapons to control the production, supply, distribution, price and quality of a large number of goods and services. Some of the measures are discussed as follows. Indian Contract Act 1872. The Act deals with the buyer's right to avoid agreements made without free consent and to claim damages for the loss caused by breach of contract. Sale of Goods Act 1930. The Act is aimed at regulating the sale of goods and protecting the interests of both buyers and sellers, yet it is mainly concerned with the interests of the buyers. The Act mainly deals with implied conditions and warranties with regard to ownership, quality or fitness of goods. Industries Development and Regulation Act 1951. The development and regulation of scheduled industries are dealt with in this Act. This Act empowers central government to conduct investigations into the affairs of scheduled industries. The Act also controls the activities, performance and results of industrial undertakings in the public interest. Thus, IDRA seeks to ensure the planned industrial development of the country that has been included in the schedule to the Act. The Central Advisory Council advises the central government on matters concerning the development of industries. Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954. This Act seeks to protect the public from poisonous and harmful goods, prevent the sale of substandard foods and to protect the interests of the consumers by eliminating fraudulent practices. The Act prohibits the import of any adulterated food as well as misbranded food. The Act also provides for penalties for offences committed under this Act. Essential Commodities Act 1955. This Act gives powers to control production, supply, distribution, etc. of essential commodities for maintaining or increasing supplies and for securing their equitable distribution and availability at fair prices. Using the powers of the Act, various ministries or departments of the central government issue control orders pertaining to commodities which are essential. The list of essential commodities has been reviewed from time to time with a reference to the production and supply of these commodities and in light of economic liberalization in consultation with the concerned ministries or departments administering these commodities. The number of essential commodities has been brought down to 7 at present through such periodic reviews. Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practice Act 1969. The Ministry of Corporate Affairs, Government of India has repealed the most controversial Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969 and has replaced it with the Competition Act 2002 with effect from September 1, 2009. MRTP Act was a grim reminder of the license quota permit Raj of the 1970s and 1980s. The Act has become redundant post July 1991 when the economic policy was announced and Chapter 3 of the MRTP Act dealing with restrictions on mergers and acquisitions was made inoperative. The Act was empowered to conduct inquiries into restrictive and unfair trade practices and to pass appropriate orders to prohibit them. Standards of Weights and Measures Act 1976 with Rules 1977 and 1990. The Act establishes standards of weights and measures and specifies the declaration to be made in packages such as name and address of the manufacturer, packer, name of the commodity, net quantity, month and year of manufacture, sale price of the commodity, etc. Some of the provisions of the Act indirectly benefit consumers by ensuring proper cost control. Environment Protection Act 1986, EPA. The Constitution of India clearly states that it is the duty of the state to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. The EPA 1986 came into force soon after the Bhopal gas tragedy. The Act consists of the following: A. Air, Prevention and Control of Pollution Rules 1989. B. Hazardous Wastes, that is their management and handling rules 1989. C. Water, that is its prevention and control of pollution rules 1989. This Act aims at protecting and improving the environment and prevention of hazards to human beings, other living creatures, plants and property. Consumer Protection Act 1986. The CPA 1989 was enacted to provide a simpler and quicker access to redressal of consumer grievances. The Act for the first time introduced the concept of consumer and conferred express additional rights on them. It provides means to protect consumers from getting cheated or harassed by the suppliers. It provides machinery whereby consumers can file their complaints, which will be entertained by the consumer forums with special powers, so that action can be taken against erring suppliers and the possible compensation may be awarded to consumer for the hardship he has undergone. No court fee is required to be paid to these forums and no need to engage a lawyer to present the case. It is a comprehensive and coordinated enforcement authority to control the unscrupulous businessmen. From time to time, the government has attempted to safeguard consumers' interests through legislations, and the CPA 1986 is considered as the most progressive statute for consumer protection. What makes it unique is its procedural simplicity and speedy and inexpensive redressal of consumer grievances. Its implementation has made it possible to protect the interests of consumers better than before. However, consumer awareness through consumer education and action by the government, consumer activists and associations are needed to make the consumer protection movement a success story in India. Let us now recapitulate what we have learned in this module. Consumerism is a battle against exploitation. It is the collective effort by consumers, organization and government to protect the interests of the consumers. It is a social force to make business more efficient and responsible. The consumerism has to do a lot with the level of consumer movement that particular economy has reached. the dynamics of business are changing to incorporate the kind of consumerism where corporate try to resolve the conflict with the consumers at their level. In fact, consumerism today is an all-pervasive term meaning nothing more than people's search for getting better value for their money. The very need for consumerism has grown because of the greed of the business community. They want to make quick bucks at the cost of hapless consumers. Consumerism sends indication to sellers and producers about their real needs, which help them to develop societal marketing. Though there are various legislations in place, consumer apathy and lack of education among the masses have kept the consumerism in India quite weak. With manufacturing activity becoming more organized, whereas the buyers are still weak and unorganized. There is a need to strengthen this movement further. Regulation of business through legislation is one of the important means of protecting the consumers. The government has enacted nearly 50 laws which can be interpreted in favor of consumers. Some of these are Indian Contract Act 1872, Sale of Goods Act 1930, Industries Development and Regulation Act 1951, Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, Essential Commodities Act 1955, Standard to Weights and Measurement Act 1976, Environmental Protection Act 1986, Consumer Protection Act 1986, Competition Act 2002. Out of this, the CPA 1986 is considered as the most progressive statute for consumer protection.